the stage Deborah Young, CEO at the Regtech Association. She'll be discussing Regtech, the industry opportunity.
Thanks, everyone. I've only got 15 minutes, so I've got some notes here so I don't forget to say anything. Thank you so much for having me. And what a perfect segue you've actually given me, because I think we've touched on a couple of things that are very close to my heart. One is about people, one is about technology, and Brian just underlined the perhaps over-regulation, but it does exist, and my association exists to try and grease the wheels and ease the path. So my name is Deborah Young. I'm going to try and use this and hopefully... Now, you did promise me it was easy. There we go. Originally, I had a risk management background, and I just wanted to unpack a little bit about industry associations, if I may. So for the best part of the last 25 years, I've worked at a range of different industry associations, including the Australian Investment Council for 9 years. I worked at the Superannuation Funds Association, FINSIA, AFMA, and so on and so forth. And across that time, I helped establish programs for engagement, and it allowed industries to be able to adopt and embrace change, including things like self-regulation, diversity and ESG programs, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about today. And the unique things about an industry association, if I'm allowed to say, is that they get to work on market dysfunctions. And 5 years ago, there was definitely a dysfunction, and so we founded the Regtech Association to address that dysfunction. And I'd like to unpack a little bit about the Regtech industry for those of you who may not have heard of it or may not be aware of it and the work that we do. We represent 150 organisations. So the dysfunction that we were trying to address, and for those investors in the room, 5 years ago, the average sales cycle was 2 years for a Regtech deployment. Most of the industry was self-funded by the practitioners themselves, or if you like, the founders themselves. And there was a lack of professional capital flowing in. The second thing was that the industry wasn't able to clearly articulate where their greatest problems were. And the industry at that time is really defined just as the financial services industry, although since then we have broadened out to other regulated industry verticals. They had lots of legacy systems. They had no idea where to start, what were the options, what their internal alignment might look like so that they could get organised to even onboard new technology, and where was the budget going to come from. The second thing was there was very low engagement from government. Government had not realised the power of Regtech technology. The fourth thing there is actually about confusion with Fintech, and I still see this a lot. Fintech and Regtech are really two completely different things, and if you think about it, if Fintechs need to be licensed or regulated, then they need technology to protect themselves from, for anti-money laundering and all that kind of thing. So they actually are customers of Regtech rather than Regtech and Fintech being thought of as the same thing. There was also no strategic voice for the industry, and I won't go through all the points on there, but there was very little collaboration between the different parts of the ecosystem. So very little collaboration with banks, very little collaboration with regulators, and certainly no collaboration with the people that actually had the solutions to the greatest problems. And then finally, there was no regular rhythm with regulators, so no meetings happening and that kind of thing. So I just want to go to the heart of what Regtech is about, and it might surprise some of you, but I think this is worthy of your attention. So this is actually all about bringing it back to consumers and to people and to the planet. Protecting consumers is absolutely core to Regtech. I'd argue that consumers don't need to know what Regtech is, but they should enjoy the trust and comfort of a well-functioning regulatory and compliance ecosystem. Let's just define it. Regtech is short for regulatory technology. It was a term that was coined about 5 or 6 years ago out of the UK, actually. And it's really the application of technologies that solve the greatest challenges in either regulation and compliance. and the additional part to that sentence, for any regulated industry verticals. So this is not just a play in financial services, but it's actually broader than that. It can be all kinds of things like real estate, construction, healthcare, education, agriculture, and so the list goes on. Anybody that has a regulation compliance burden, Regtech can help. So what we see Regtech is actually as an enabler and an accelerator. It is not a disruptor in the same way that other tech might be seen as a disruptor. Usually founded by ex-industry practitioners. So most Regtech founders will be people that have worked either for a regulator, for a professional services firm, in a bank. They've seen the real problems and they've created solutions around those problems. So what you will find in Regtech founders is a very mature set of individuals with deep subject matter expertise. I've talked about that it's agnostic. We're aligning around ESG. There's some really important things happening in the ESG space, and part of our role is to help educate our stakeholders on how important ESG is going to become to their customer base. So that's their financial institution or their institutional customers. It's going to allow them, by getting on board with ESG programs, it's going to allow them to satisfy potential investors. So that's those of you in the room who are putting the founders through their paces on ESG. We're preparing them for that. And it's also allowing them to have a different style of conversation with their institutional customer base. You may also hear the term SupTech and Regtech. They're actually the same thing. SupTech is just usually put in a regulatory context, and it's short for supervisory. So Regtech brings productivity, efficiency, and the lowering of costs and increased safety and confidence, as I've been alluding to. And I put a slide up here about why institutions, and in this context, it is actually just talking about financial services, but you can see some of those numbers are pretty high. So the breach, the cost of breaches is high, the cost of compliance is rising, and so this is why most institutions will be looking very favourably at Regtech right now. What we've done to try and help everybody out is we've created a taxonomy for Regtech, because if you simply tried to work out who all of the Regtech vendors in the world were, it's a very confusing space. So what we've done is we've built a taxonomy, and you can actually go to our website, and based on your risk profile or the area of risk that you might most be interested in, you can go there and you will find everything in a very logical order. So we're finding that the customer base for Regtech is using our directory, our online directory, quite a lot, and it's a free directory. Anybody can access it. It's very, very important that we get to a global language around Regtech, and so we are promoting this as a key global language. There was also mention earlier about the different kinds of Regtech solutions, and I saw employment compliance was up there. That is a great example of a newly emerging range of Regtech technologies that are really solving some quite complex problems for businesses of all shapes and sizes. So if you look at employment compliance, it's everything from how do you validate somebody's identity, how do you onboard them if you've never met them, how do you ensure that they've got the right to work in your jurisdiction? How do you ensure that their university degree is actually real? Then how do you manage them, and how do you exchange data with them over the life cycle of their employment? How do you ensure that they get the right CPD, or the right professional development whilst they're employed by you? And then how do you offboard them at the other end? So it's a fantastic growth area, and this is a map. And I should just say, these aren't just pretty logos on a page. Every single one of these organisations is a paid up member of the association. You can see some pretty big brand names on there as well. I have physical copies of that map if you'd like to take one away, so please do feel free. One of the things that people may not know about Regtech is that Australia is the third largest Regtech product producer in the world. So we have a powerhouse. We're sitting on a powerhouse of product development right here in this country. So you can look all around you to see great Regtech firms. But what I would also say is our association is a global association. So we have companies from offshore. Over the last 12 months, we've seen some successful capital raises in the sector. This isn't all of them, but I quickly grabbed a couple of examples if you wanted to go and look at the the style and the breadth of investment coming into the industry at the moment, you can go and do that. A couple of key things. Now, we're about to drop some new research, and I don't have the insights yet, but our last lot of research, which was late last year, showed a very, very resilient industry. So most of our founders during the pandemic simply went home and were able to operate as situation normal. And in fact, it's arguable that adoption of Regtech accelerated during the pandemic. What you will also see is, and I talked, and I'll finish off with it on my slide, but we did shorten that time to value. So instead of a 2-year sales cycle, we've brought that down considerably, and that's through education and also just helping enable the solutions getting into channel faster. There's a bunch of other stuff on there, and I'm sure these slides will be shared with you, and I'm just conscious of time. Nobody's waved at me yet. I've also got on here some different perspectives. So that's some vendor perspectives that you might find valuable, but also what are the Regtech buyers thinking? One of the core things that I am going to predict, we're going to see a huge appetite for Regtech within government. And what I mean by that, I don't mean government as a policymaker. I mean government as a buyer and a consumer of Regtech. And we're already starting to see it around such things as e-signatures, digital identity, and so the list goes on. And a lot of those things were amplified as real problems during the pandemic. And we are seeing huge appetite from government right now. So I started kind of on this slide and I thought I'd finish. So what we see now, there's going to be a couple of primary drivers going forward for the industry. One is going to be diversity and inclusion. The other one I talked about briefly, and that is around aligning with ESG. We have brought the sales cycle down to between 8 and 9 months from 2 years in a relatively short period of time. So the appetite is very, very high, and we are now seeing institutions on board Regtech at a faster pace. We've helped with identifying the problems by doing things like developing that taxonomy. So if any of you are interested, you can go on online and check that out. There's a more sophisticated understanding of Regtech now too, I believe. A couple of years ago, the Productivity Commission reached out to me. This is always a good sign when the Productivity Commission comes to you and says, tell us what you know about Regtech. They've published a report on that. And we are now seeing, as I said, government becoming a buyer. There's a clearer delineation between Fintech and Regtech. There is a more strategic voice and a trusted community. And then last but not least, we have regular dialogue with all of the Australian regulators, with the FCA in the UK, and we are now starting to develop those relationships with some US regulators as well. Increased investor engagement is one of my key strategic priorities for this year, so we welcome any of you. Please do reach out, come and talk to me. I can share a copy of that map with you.